So hello to everyone out there. Thank you so much for tuning in and for joining us today. I'm Jessica from Leiamoon, joined today by my co-founder, my loving partner in all things, Andrew.
Hi, everyone.
We are so excited to be speaking with Nathan Riley, MD, a board-certified OB-GYN, fellow of FACOG, and founder of Beloved Holistics. It is quite rare, but thankfully becoming less rare thanks to Nathan, to find an MD that's boldly stepped outside of the system and see people as whole beings. Not a meat suit filled with organs, as Nathan puts it, but a thinking and a feeling person connected to something so much bigger.
Nathan offers a truly holistic gynecology and pregnancy support, as well as fertility programs and consultant services with midwives and various birth workers. He empowers his clients to connect with their bodies, listening to their inner knowing, and advocate for themselves. He also supports vaginal steaming, and we look forward to diving into this conversation together.
So because we're hosting this conversation live on our website today, for those of you that are watching, we welcome you to log into the chat, to comment and ask questions as we go. We're grateful for your presence and always for your curiosity, and see this always as being a collaborative learning experience. So please feel free to tune in and let us know what you're thinking. Yeah, so we're really excited to welcome you today, Nathan. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, it's a huge pleasure, guys. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for for entrusting me with, your stool. It's such a beautiful product. Even my wife is kind of impressed by it. She's sort of interested in making it a routine practice of her own. And it was just nice to find something like that, because I was actually considering carpentering, designing my own sauna, steam saunas for people that were affordable, but it was never going to be quite right. And I don't really want to invest in that. I'm glad somebody else invested in that process, I suppose, because I have been finding that since leaving the conventional system, this is one of the primary modalities that I have everybody from women with persistent HPV, men with urethritis, men with like a jock itch, like a tinea sort of infection on their groins, to fibroids, to abnormal periods, to fertility challenges. I'm finding a use for steaming across the board. So it's nice to have it's just nice to be in touch with somebody who cares about this.
We're also so grateful for this convergence of, all of our histories of where we were at, rediscovering and reconnecting with our bodies in ancient ways and finding, new tools to make it more accessible. So I'm so glad that your wife is finding it to be just that.
Yeah.
I would love to start off with just learning more about your journey, your background, where you grew up, and what really put you on the path of becoming an OB-GYN.
The best answer that I've been able to come up with for that question is that I've always been very, very curious. And when I first was a part of a birth, I was a total stranger. I was a med student, maybe in my second or third of the 4 years of medical school. You see a birth and you're like, whoa. And for a lot of people, I think it scares you, it scares them away, because there's a lot of power in birth. Like, you see a human being emerge out of a human being. I mean, it's like a scene from Alien for somebody who's never seen that before. And of course, they showed a video of that in health class when we were in like middle school, but you didn't really have any context for it. Now you're sexually active. Now you're maybe even hoping to have children of your own, and you get to see this person and their partner go through this extraordinary thing. And what the lasting impact, I guess, that had on me was that no longer did I feel like I was going to have the answer on the test, because I will never, ever understand what that's like. I might get appendicitis someday. And then if I counsel somebody that we, want to remove your appendix, I would know what appendicitis feels like, for example. And you could say the same for many other medical scenarios, but not childbirth. This was going to be the ultimate sort of conjecture, a lifelong, career-long conjecture as to what is actually happening here. And the further and further you lean into that, the more and more sort of unclear it becomes. So for the first time, I wasn't going to have an answer to the test. And us doctors love taking tests and love answering the questions right more than our peers. That's how we got to be doctors in the first place. But despite getting good grades, it was like kind of boring. Like, if you have all the answers, then why would it be called the practice of medicine? Excuse me. So most conventional doctors are sort of conditioned to believe that if they don't have the answer, then they're incompetent. If they don't have the answer, then they're not good enough. They're not smart enough. They didn't go to the right program, or they didn't work hard enough while they're in residency or whatever. but birth is not there's not a multiple choice, test question around birth. And for me, it was like, gosh, of all the things to be curious about, this is the one that I will never be expected to have the answer to. And that was very relieving to me after taking so many bubble sheets, Scantron tests over my life. But the unfortunate reality was that once you get into your residency training, which is the 4 hard years of specialty training after medical school, if you're lucky enough to match into one of those programs, you go right back to if you don't know it, then you're not working hard enough, or maybe you're not cut out for this, or you're not tough enough for this, or whatever. And so I found myself in that same sort of, space. But when I got my board certification, I could ultimately decide I'm going to do this the way that I would want it to be done if I was a woman having a baby, or a couple going through conception challenges, fertility challenges, or even a woman going through menopause and not wanting to be pumped full of pharmaceuticals and surgery. Can we be curious about this? Can we start asking questions again? And that's how I found myself doing what I do today. And fortunately, those questions have led me to a lot of really, really great practices. I mentioned vaginal steaming already, but there's a lot of functional foods and whatnot that help to strengthen the immune system, to clear HPV, to raise a man's testosterone naturally. I mean, like, there's a lot we can be doing. And that curiosity now, I have sort of the bandwidth and the space, and no administrators telling me I can't. So that's how I landed where I am now. And I am very fortunate that I can do this type of work now.
Were you coming up against that a lot in your practice, in what we're calling the medical industrial complex of kind of being told no when you had your alternative ideas, and then hitting that wall so many times? I imagine you're like, okay, well, now I have to invent something other or outside of this space that I've trained so hard to become a part of. So I'm sure, like, deciding to veer away from that, it must have been a difficult choice, or maybe it was the most obvious choice you've ever made. I'm just curious what that moment was like.
I think if more of us would actually kind of be guided by their intuition and by their sort of love, like, what do you love doing? If more people sort of pursued their career based on that and not some sort of financial wealth, I think we'd have a lot happier of a society. For me, there was actually no other way to do it. I found myself kind of just flying under the radar, just trying to not be noticed in residency, because people knew I had some, wacky ideas, right? Like, when I was in residency, it was still not super cool to rub, to put a sponge in the vagina and rub it all over the baby to see the baby with the flora of the vagina of their mother if they had to be, born by C-section. But I remember reading an article about it, and I was like, guys, why don't we try this? And people just thought, like, oh, there he goes again, like the crunchy granola hippie guy. But I was also the guy with abs and shoulders, and like, I was eating super organic, healthy food we got at the farmer's market. Like, that's also not what doctors do. So I, like, across the board, was a total black sheep. And my unwillingness to intervene in childbirth got me a lot of attention that I probably didn't want. And I ended up carrying around this folder right here, which is now filled with like mortgage statements and whatnot. But it was filled with papers that justified my unwillingness to intervene in this otherwise natural, or dare I say sacred, unfolding, which is childbirth, which I don't see as a medical procedure, and I don't see pregnancy as a disease. But in a program that expects you to know the answer and to treat it as such, that, where there's some intervention that we can do. What's the intervention, Dr. Riley? Think. And I'm like, I don't want to do any intervention. Well, you didn't study hard enough. It's like, no, I just don't really think that we need to intervene in this. Having those types of ideals in a conventional medical system did not win me a lot of friends, but I was one of the few doctors I knew that really stayed true to myself, despite the criticisms and getting, on remediation and probationary periods because people didn't think I was a good doctor. I had one GYN oncologist compare me to Patch Adams, and I was like, that is the nicest thing ever. And they were like, Patch Adams was a terrible doctor because he wasn't using, he wasn't doing all the sedative medications for the psych patients. He wasn't recommending shock therapy, these types of things, but he was making a big difference in the lives of psychiatric patients around, within his region. So all of this is to say, it was never even a doubt. Like, people were like, you're so courageous. And I'm like, no, I'm just being me. And I've managed to be resourceful enough to make this type of life work for myself. And there are downsides. Like, I don't have a 401k that my company's padding. I don't have a, paid time off. Every time I'm not working, I'm not making money. But we also have slightly different ideals as to what that doctor lifestyle would look like. And if I can actually spend my time helping people for less money, that's going to mean a lot more to me and my children and the legacy that I leave behind.
Well, we hear you and we see you on, coming at life from your own perspective on the fringes. We're not doctors, but like we can kind of relate in the sense that we're both independently employed, like full-time working people, and decided 6 years or so ago to like take a chance on an idea of creating a vaginal steam seat. So, and we don't have 401ks or paid time off,
sick days,
and we've got 2 kids, and so yeah, we're right there with you in that regard.
And that's also why I love to support companies that are doing that. It's like, hey, how courageous. Like, you almost sometimes don't have an option, but even if you were to be courageous, why not just try? Why not just try to do something that's actually going to improve our society, as opposed to going on Twitter and just bitching and moaning all the time? I could do that all day. I'm great at bitching and moaning. But it sort of starts to occur to you that like I'm complaining about things that I actually have some hand in changing. And it might be one person at a time, but that's all that life is. Like you're painting one bird at a time. Like that's the only way to do this. So you can either sit there and whine and moan about how terrible government oversight is, or these policies are, or this practice is, or this hospital system is, or you can just build a life raft for people so that we don't have to go and blowtorch the whole system. Although sometimes I feel like that might be the most reasonable next step. Instead, I can just say, listen, you guys do you with your surgeries and your 1/3 of babies coming by C-section and all those inductions, and you're lopping off people's cervixes and all that. That's fine. You do that. I'm going to offer the alternative over here. And it's going to be a very compassionate space where you get to spend as much time with me as you need. And we're going to use as many lifestyle and otherwise natural, holistic means as we can before we even get there. And it doesn't have to be exclusive to actually, even vaginal steaming. This can be in conjunction with the care you're getting with your doctor. That's what people need to really appreciate here, is this is something that is in your power. You have full power over how you treat your body, the self-love you provide yourself. And this can be, you two as a couple intimately. This could be where you put your energy, presence being your greatest currency. How do you spend time with your kids? This is all in your power. So we can go and blame everybody else, but a big thing that we teach in the Born Free Method, our new childbirth and postpartum course, is that like there is incredible power in just reclaiming the agency that you have over your own decisions, but also owning the outcomes of those decisions. There's immense power there, but you've been conditioned from 5 years old to raise your hand for everything from going to the bathroom. So when these types of technologies are starting to come up, I'm proud of you guys for taking that approach, because you're going to help a lot of people. You're already helping a lot of people. And that's not something many other people out there who maybe even see the world through the same lens that you do, that they're actually doing. So you guys have put your money where your mouth is. And the worst case scenario is you go bankrupt and you start over. Like, who the hell cares? You've done so much good.
Every day we ask ourselves that question. We have to consider potential worst case scenarios, but things are going pretty well so far, and we're happy to that people like you are now getting to use the product that we've been working so hard to develop. But you mentioned in your Born Free method, so that was just segging into that. I think that was going to be our next question. Can you tell us more about exactly what that is and how you came up with it, and just fill everybody in on the Born Free method?
Yeah, and actually, we mentioned vaginal. We have a whole unit, a whole lesson within a unit on vaginal steaming in the postpartum period. I also mention it as a means of helping to prepare the body for childbirth, which I know is being used in hospitals, several hospitals around the world. This is not a universal practice anywhere, but so I'll get into steaming. We're huge supporters of steaming. Sarah Rosser is one of the farm midwives down in Tennessee. She was my co-creator on this. And when we got together, we both were kind of disillusioned with the medical system. We both were doing home birth, and we had so many people coming our way because of what happened during COVID, that people who wanted a truly autonomous birth, a sovereign birth. That word often comes up in our cohorts. And we wanted to put people, give something to them, but we're just two individuals that are very, very busy with our own children, our own lives and self-care and everything else. So in looking at the whole spectrum of courses, there are a couple really good ones out there, but in general, we didn't find any course that was doing a good job of starting with the conversation around taking responsibility for your actions and the outcomes of those decisions, all the way through informed consent bioethics. A lot of doctors, midwives, nurses, whoever, have anybody with a license is afraid to talk about COVID and vaccines. We went in like a bull in a gift shop. Like, There is so much that people need to understand about this process, specifically the violation of bioethics when a doctor can't tell you the risks of a treatment or an injection like the mRNA vaccines for fear of losing my license. Like that is an abject violation of any person's, right to informed consent or autonomy. It's the right to autonomy through the lens of bioethics. But then, of course, going into the risks, benefits, alternatives to every intervention in childbirth under the sun, going deeply into postpartum, deeply into intimacy, a whole unit for fathers, several units on all of the lifestyle modifications that we know, without a doubt, are going to prevent you from needing various interventions, unnecessary inductions, speedier postpartum recovery, healthy placenta, decrease your risk of preeclampsia, gestational diabetes. There's a giant chunk of lifestyle medicine in there. I'm also, trained in functional medicine as well. So there is some hat tips to that, but we need to get out of this lens that there's a prescription for every problem, because childbirth, again, is not a medical procedure. If it was, then all of this data that we've been relying on would be super helpful. So we cover a wide variety of topics, including cannabis use, psychedelics use, a lot of topics that are just considered untouchable by the medical community. And Sarah and I just went in guns blazing. So there's quite a bit here that isn't covered in other courses, but we also like to balance the data with intuition and the fact that this is a spiritual unfolding as much as it is a physical task, like a physical workout. Having a baby is very hard. So we won't diminish that. But there's also more to this than just healthy mom, healthy baby afterwards. So as the world is changing, more and more people are wanting to have a really good idea as to what are the risks and benefits of these various things, vaccines being a huge one. Antibiotics has always been a really big one. I mean, you could talk about vitamin K, Rogam, the list goes on and on, hepatitis B vaccine, day one of life. But they also want to know, what can I do? Like, what is in my power right now to do that doesn't rely on me going to the doctor's office with my 3 other kids in tow, 6 weeks postpartum, for them to spend 15 seconds looking at my vulva and touching my breasts and telling me everything's okay. Isn't there more to this? And that's really what the Born-Free method is about, is reimagining what prenatal and postpartum care could look like, and giving our the Born-Free family, the people that enroll in our course, ample opportunity to not just ask the questions and learn from the data and from our experience and from the experience of their cohort, but also giving them over 250 citations as to how to learn more, like food plans, exercises. Here's a stretching regimen that will help open the hips up. Here is a presentation from a Chinese medicine doctor on restoring the yin and yang depletion that happens through the lens of Chinese medicine, which is, by the way, way better than the allopathic model for almost everything, including postpartum care. How can we engage in vaginal steaming? We had Kelly Garza come in and do an interview there. And Kelly Garza, of course, is the steamy chick. And now that we have, some more people like you guys that are starting to generate some options here, people are going to be looking for it. People want to take power over their healing. They don't want to have to rely on the doctors and the midwives and everything, because what happened during COVID was we continued to outsource our power, and it didn't lead to a lot of good things for a lot of people. And I'm sorry to be so obvious about my views. The idea that I couldn't talk about vaccines without losing my license was a huge kick in the butt. I mean, that was I have $500,000 medical school debt. I have 2 board certifications. I've got more diplomas than I even have room for on walls, which is why they're all in a box somewhere. I did all the work. I did all the investment. I have been sitting with people at bedside for birth and death. I'm also an end-of-life doctor for 14 years now. I'm the one who's going to counsel the patient. And if I can't counsel them, then I can't do my job as a healer. So that's the Born-Free method in a nutshell. People get life from that side. They get all of the future updates because information is constantly changing. We're going to be revising a couple lessons here. And they get 12 months of weekly calls with me and Sarah, who, again, is one of the farm midwives, IMA's legacy in Summertown, Tennessee.
Wow. Yeah. Born-Free sounds like such an incredible offering. I mean, is an incredible offering. And you keep mentioning too, like of getting out of the way of what's this miraculous, amazing physiological, spiritual process that the body goes through, and putting, that power back in the hands of the birthing person, of the women. And I think there's a huge fear around that too, because of the way we've been living. I mean, I resonate so much with the idea, or with the reality, that we need to take back the reins. Your body the best. and that all these practices are available for us to tune in, listen up, and heal together. But I think that's still very intimidating due to like the history of how we've been practicing healing and wellness together. So how do you see your role as kind of trying to bridge and like carry and attract and magnetize? Because I think there's so many that are already like on the path of this, but it's that there's still like a lot of bridge work to be done here. So I'm curious how you just move towards that.
And if I may just add on to that, can you offer a little clarity in with the born free method, like what role people still have with their, in-person care providers, while they're going through that with you, or like how much more do you provide? And this just adding on to that, because I think that ties into the bridging the gap question there.
Yeah, well, first I'll start by addressing what you said, Jessica, which is really related to, so, there's this term salutogenesis. The body really wants to heal. The body wants to function well. We just have to get out of the way. The same goes for childbirth, right? So the healing thing, you could look at like a cut on your arm. If you keep putting like a alcohol on a wound, it will never heal. It dries it out. It disrupts the natural healing process because those immune cells are trying to get there to fix things. If instead we, clean the surface, keep it dry, maybe don't put a bunch of other contamination into the wound, and we're eating a healthy diet, you'll heal in a matter of 12 hours. You'll have like a pretty clean looking incision there. Salutogenesis is this concept that if you can give the body the right resources, the body will be able to reharmonize with its surroundings. The same goes for childbirth.
How is the born free method relating to women still being connected to their doctor, maybe in a more like hospital setting, and then also through
Right.
this body sovereignty?
So when you take the course, you're going to be getting all of the counseling that you ever wanted from your healthcare provider. Most doctors are going to counsel you in a way that makes them the most comfortable with your decision, right? So, hey, I really think the baby's better out than in, don't you? Like, don't you think it's time for an induction? Or, hey, you don't want your baby to die, right? Like, it's not meant to be so undermining of your autonomy. But the way that we are modeled to counsel is, we don't want this bad thing to happen, and I'm not going to let it happen on my watch. So you're either with me or we're going to make you do the thing that we want to do because we can't bear to stand the idea of a dead baby, right? And I hate to use that language, but that's actually what's implied. And that's scaring, that fear-mongering through language really, really matters. A truly informed decision would include risks, benefits, alternatives, using non-coercive language when a person's not under duress, and then supporting them in their decision. So the Born Free method, when you join, you have this whole community, and we're all in this together. Whether you're pregnant, hoping to conceive, or you're a birth worker, we're all in these conversations together. If a specific question were to arise, the course is going to do its best to give you all that counseling. But if there's additional questions, you come to us and we kind of sift it out and help you sort it out. But the reality is that even if a doctor was trying to use compassionate shared decision-making, as it's called, there's a certain way that hospital and medical culture does things. So let's say that you have a baby that's butt down and your doctor never trained to help with the maneuvers to relieve, a held up arm or a held up shoulder when the baby's coming out butt first. That's called vaginal breech. The doctor might say it's not safe to have a vaginal breech baby. Well, it might not be safe in your hands, doc, because even though you proclaim that you're an expert in birth, you never did any training and you never sought out the extra training to be able to help facilitate these types of maneuvers. What you get with the Born Free method, like what we're trying to really do above all, is for people to reclaim whatever is in their control and to very, very gently begin to just practice saying no, thank you. So perhaps maybe it was recommended that you do this thing, and you're worried that if I say no, then the doctor is going to fire me. Like I'm going to have to leave his practice or her practice. There are ways to address your medical team, even if you do happen to have a hospital birth, although most of the people taking our course are looking to have a home birth or a free birth. There are ways to talk to your medical provider, your midwife or your doctor in the hospital, that is not going to leave them butthurt. It actually might even stroke their ego a little bit. But if somebody calls you up and says, hey, do you want to go to see a movie? How often do we just say, no, thank you. I think I'm good. I'm good staying in tonight, because we're afraid of what their response is going to be. They're not going to think, they're not going to like me. They're going to get mad at me or whatever else. You shouldn't be practicing that no thank you when you're having painful surges every 3 minutes apart and you're rolling in through triage, to be examined for the first time in the hospital. So that's a big part of this, is really exercising. It's not only giving you the information and helping you tune into your intuition and connecting to your partner and your baby. It's also practicing exercising your autonomy, which is largely lacking in the world right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's kind of the interesting part about vaginal steaming too, is it's giving everyone everywhere an opportunity to sit with their body and get to know it again, rather than completely surrendering that part to an authority that gets to tell you how to take care of it. I think that's been part of the history for women for at least like the last 200 years. So yeah, we really applaud what you're preaching, and not even just preaching, but just like embodying yourself in the work that you do and leading by example with people in your programs. You mentioned free birth also as part of the women that are subscribed to your program. And a lot of times I've heard that free birthers are of the opinion that any and all midwives that have had to go through some sort of establishment training kind of propagandizes them and makes them prone to interrupting the natural birth process. That's kind of an extreme end of the spectrum on that. But what would you say to these people, or how do they integrate into your program?
Well, first and foremost, if I was going to have a baby, which I never will, I would have a free birth. And it may be because I've had so much experience with birth, or maybe it's just exciting to me. My middle name is Risky, I don't know. But for some reason, there's a great appeal for me. And I understand why so many women are pushing to, or are feeling encouraged to take that approach. When the word free birth comes to mind, unfortunately, there's a lot of groups out there that are promoting free birth and supporting free birth, but they're not really supporting people's process in pursuing free birth. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of guilt associated if you don't actually go through with the free birth. If you decide something doesn't feel right, I need to get some help, you're kind of excommunicated from those communities. I'm not going to name any by name, but I have taken care of, not even an embellishment, at least 100 clients who have been traumatized by the conversation around free birth, which tells me that those people who are at the top of the food ladder promoting this term free birth actually don't really care about autonomy. They are fighting for power and privilege in a world where people are very impressionable. So a large number of people, not everybody, like me, I'm not one of these people, but a large number of people are deciding to have a free birth because they were traumatized by their either hospital, birth center, or home birth experience, and they feel compelled to do this without the help because that help actually did more harm than good. That's an area where we are asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, well, how could people be so silly or lazy or stupid to have a free birth? Like how irresponsible or whatever. Maybe we should be asking, why don't they believe this jargon around your advertised safety in the hospital system? Same could be said about home birth. So I think that we have to be very, very careful with how we approach birth. It is not just magical thinking to think everything is going to go fine. And if something bad happens, it's not because you didn't believe in it or trust in it enough. Sometimes, because we're mortal, sometimes babies die. And so through the lens of radical responsibility, it's like, listen, I get that you want to have a free birth, but more importantly, let's spend 90 minutes unpacking what happened in your past births and how you would feel most supported, so that this isn't an option for you just out of sort of desperation.
That was great. Could you maybe just rewind, and just for maybe the people out here that are going to be tuning in that don't fully understand, and I would speak to especially the fathers out there, or fathers to be, that don't even understand what we're talking about. When you say free birth, right? We have that on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, we have maybe like a hyper medicalized hospital birth. But could you kind of like just go through, what those spectrum of birth options are and like how you define them?
Yeah, so that around 98, 99% of births in the United States take place actually in most of the Western world. Like most of the developed nations, about 98 to 99% of babies are coming in the hospital. It's not universal, not every single country. We're talking average, it's about there. They're coming in the hospital, and what that means is that there are artificial, you know, stopwatches going as to how long a person's been at this dilation or how long is the labor, taking. We've got this unvalidated fetal heart rate, continuous fetal heart rate monitoring system, which is the little tracings that you see in every labor and delivery room in the United States. You see that up on the wall. It's never been validated. Every OB-GYN is going to have a slightly different interpretation, yet it was introduced in order to reduce cerebral palsy rates, but it hasn't panned out. The only thing that has actually been impacted is our C-section rates, which are now 1/3 of babies coming out, through the abdomen, nationwide. So on the one hand, you have a very highly medicalized or highly interventive process. Maybe a step down from that would be what's called a birth center, which is usually still having to play ball by the rules of some legislator in the state capitol who's determined that this is what's allowed or not allowed at a birth center. So you're still having to play by the rules of, quote, the system. And oftentimes these legislators have absolutely zero business making any sort of policies around birth. Below that, so, or next to that, I guess, would be a home birth, where you have in birth center, births are usually attended to by midwives, sometimes doctors, but very rarely. And they're usually CPMs or CNMs, certified nurse midwives, have a slightly different sort of pedigree than the CPMs. I personally enjoy working with CPMs a little bit more because they seem less like obstetricians than certified nurse midwives, but I won't go down there right now. I have a lot of friends that do both. So the home birth almost always is being attended by a certified professional midwife or a licensed midwife or a radical midwife who may not even be licensed. And there's varying degrees of experience and expertise and skills across the board there, but it's usually word of mouth and how many births they've been to, the type of apprenticeship they did. Are they going to continuing education? You're getting continuing education credits. Like I'm hosting a twins breach conference up here in Louisville in August in order to help people refine their skills a little bit in some of these things. That's how you would select the birth worker. But at home, you don't even need to have a birth worker. If you had no birth worker, including, depending on who defines this, including maybe a doula, and in some cases, even your male partner or your female partner for that matter, you are totally alone. That would be an out-of-hospital birth, not in a birth center, not in a hospital, could be at home, could be out in the water with the dolphins, but you have no medical professional at your side. And some, like I said, would consider a doula to be, equally sort of disruptive as all these other professionals. But the definition of free birth, or also called wild birth, is wide ranging. Everybody has a different opinion as to what counts. I have had, even my wife kind of had a free birth in our bedroom, even though there were 3 medical professionals there. The baby just came out so easily. They almost didn't even have to be there. So if it's a matter of disrupting the process, which is very relevant, activating a person's 5 senses, getting their brain going, getting their fear centers rolling, will actually disrupt the role of oxytocin in childbirth. So the less disruption, less distraction, the more free your birth is. And so that would be one way that I would kind of qualify it. If you had very, very, very minimal, if any, distraction or disruption, you effectively had a free birth. In the hospital, that's almost impossible because of protocols and procedures where they have to go in every so often and talk to you, ask you questions, put in new IVs, whatever. It's kind of impossible to have that. On the other hand, you could have that at home, or you could have it in the woods with nobody around.
I remember when I was planning the birth of our first child, our daughter, and just thinking, well, I can birth anywhere. I feel really confident about allowing myself the freedom to just be with what is. I can do this in a hospital. I can do that. And kind of like the longer I got into that process and started understanding like the clamps that were putting on my ankles of like, you have to be in this position. You're above 35. You don't want you to go past 39 weeks, like all those things. And just realizing, listening in like that, I wasn't gonna be able to do this there. And that was shocking to me. Like everyone I knew was doing that. And I mean, it's been shifting so much. But everyone I knew, at least that gave birth when we were younger, like in our 20s, that's what they did.
Yeah.
It was really hard for me to step out of that paradigm and trust my body to do this in its own way. And I'm glad that I did. But yeah, it's just, I think that transition for so many families to realize that this is not the way to be free and for our babies to be free in the world. It's pretty intense. Something else I know that you offer is a more collaborative relationship between home birth midwives or any midwives and your expertise as a MD or OB-GYN. Can you talk a little bit more about that too? Like, how do you see there being more of a bridge between those worlds?
I don't really see there being a bridge ever be, like a functional bridge ever being constructed. And that's not cynicism. It's just the reality is that people who pursue midwifery care, it's such a far cry from obstetrics care that it's two different universes. Yet many of the midwives attending home births, for example, are sort of at the whim of the policymakers who are, elbow to elbow with the hospital CEOs and all the people that are making policies there. So on the one hand, I don't really see myself as building a bridge. Like, we're gonna make maternity care better by improving the collegiality between OBs and midwives. The history of this goes back as far back as written human history. So we're not going to fix that problem. However, there are many midwives in service to clients around the country in states that are not very friendly to midwives, so much so that they actually require the midwife to have a supervising physician. And if you don't have a supervising physician to sign your orders, to review charts once in a while, you can't practice here. So there are many, many states, even big states, like Texas is a really important one. There are many states where the OBs are so unfriendly to the midwives that the midwives don't have anybody to help sign their orders. And therefore, there would be no midwives unless there was an OB to stand that role. So I decided I'll get licensed in whatever state midwives need it. I've got 24 now, 24 of the 50 states. And I sign their orders. We review charts. They call me if they have a consultation question. I maybe even meet with their clients once in a while. So this is my collaborator program. And I'm serving midwives in roughly 24 states right now. And that requires me to go and apply for the license there to get all the background checks. Like, it is a lot of work, but also, like you guys, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. If I really believe in traditional midwifery care, this is me putting a lot on the line. If something bad were to happen, it could come back to me because I'm on their orders. But I'd rather like go down trying than to just sit back and say, oh, well, like, we're all fucked in the maternity care system,
Can you actually add on to that, in your opinion, what the value is of traditional midwifery care versus like what an OB brings to the table? And again, especially I would aim this towards like fathers to be speaking from my own experience. When Jessica first got pregnant, I was very open to doing whatever she wanted to do. And we went on a whole journey of care providers, that kind of spanned that spectrum, and we ended up at home birth. But in the beginning, I'm aware in hindsight that the base level programming that I had was like, well, we have to see an OB. Like, that was just all of that I knew. And because that was just the norm, I didn't even know what a midwife was. And the idea of going outside of seeing an OB was something that I was like already pre-programmed into believing was like going to be a lesser level of safety and care for my wife. But I didn't know even what the difference between the two were. So if there's, something that you can add to that clarification, I think that would be much appreciated.
Yeah. Let's reframe that question for me, because I could go on like a really long tangent, but let's reframe that from the view of the male partner that's listening. Just entertain me with that real quick.
Okay, I'm a guy, my wife's pregnant, right? And she comes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about maybe having a home birth, which means like we would have a midwife. But we could also go to the doctor and, to an OB-GYN. That's what everybody else is doing. And from my perspective, I'm thinking, of course we would go see an OB. Why would we want to not do that? Like, why would we even consider not going to an OB-GYN and seeing a midwife instead?
At a hospital.
Yeah. Well, the first question is, why are you feeling called to have a home birth? Right? What have you heard about home birth? What is your experience with birth? How did your last birth go, if that was the case? But the more important question is that as a part of our conditioning in the United States, we have presumed that everything in hospitals that happens is going to keep us safe. The reality is that even for many women who have natural, unmedicated, maybe even relatively undisturbed hospital births, feel like something wasn't right. They feel like maybe I wasn't spoken to. appropriately, or I wasn't consented before they shoved their hand in my vagina. I felt like I was under duress when I signed that consent form. So even though healthy mom, healthy baby was the outcome, I feel harmed. I feel broken, and the word trauma comes up. This is really where we start to see what happened in your previous birth that made you feel so compelled to not go back there? Because these hospitals have billions and trillions of dollars of technology to, quote, save your life. So why would a person not feel safe there when the hospital is advertising a safe haven for birthing women? The reality is that when we consider just the metrics, sure, it's safe to have a baby in the hospital. Very, blood loss can be measured, blood values can be checked, we can do ultrasounds, we can all this fancy stuff. But if our goal is only to have a healthy mom and a healthy baby, we miss out on the entire part of the human experience. So if I asked any couple who comes to me, how much do you love one another? They might say a lot. We love each other a lot. Well, how much? Like, tell me the quantity. They might kind of look at me stupid, and they should look at me stupid because that's a stupid question. But just because you can't measure love doesn't mean it's important. It's not important. The same goes for ecstasy, joy, sadness, despair, and trauma. These are the types of things that on the mental, emotional, and spiritual levels actually matter to the human experience. But we, since Rene Descartes and Francis Bacon and Aristotelian times in the 17th century roughly, we have only seen those measurable facets of the human experience as the purview of medicine. Everything else is, up for grabs for somebody else. As long as you don't lose too much blood, you don't get an infection, and you and your baby are breathing and walking out of here at the end of the day, we did our job. But that's becoming less and less relevant to the masses. Your likelihood of you bleeding out to death in the United States is extremely low, even if you're in the woods somewhere by yourself having a wild birth. The reality of you dying in childbirth, even if you're not the healthiest person in the world, is still extremely low. So if every one of our efforts, if this multi-trillion-dollar industry of healthcare in the United States, if our only goal is to keep you and your baby alive through this process, that is an expensive additional 0.0% of lives that we've saved, while simultaneously walking into a room, barely introducing ourselves, and telling the partner and the nurse to hold you down so that I can, quote, check on the baby by shoving my gloved hand into your vagina. That actually leads to far more damage downstream than whatever the perceived dangers are of childbirth, of which they are very, very, very small. So all that this is to say is that we have determined within our practice of modern maternity care in the United States, we are willing to do harm to the mental, emotional, or spiritual part of a person if we can make sure that their physical meat suit continues to work. And that is where depression, anxiety, trauma, fear, like these deeply problematic things in our society, this is where this all came from.
And to think like so many women miss out then on the deeply transformative, miraculous, spiritually awakening moments that they get to have the privilege of coming through their body, maybe even once in their lifetime, a handful in their lifetime. And it kind of the environment completely like shuts that possibility down, I think, for so many. And I think we haven't been fully aware that that's really what this is. That's what birth is.
Yeah.
I remember too in my process of trying out different scenarios while I was pregnant with my first, and I then transferred to see some midwives in a hospital, thinking, then I would maybe get a little more compromised, or that it would resonate more for me. But still, I kept being told, oh, the residents will really love that somebody wants to birth here naturally without any intervention. They've never seen that before. But then I was imagining, oh, all these people will be observing me for their own learning experience rather than honoring this real moment for my family. And I think that's a big leap or mental leap to make when choosing home birth as well. And I think I'm glad that we ended up on the same page as that. And again, grateful that you're really, illuminating that for so many more people.
Yeah. Well, one final thing I'll say, because I know we're running out of time, is that with all of the problems in the world, with all the stuff that's happening on a day-to-day basis, if you look at any news channel, it seems like there's a lot of bad stuff happening. And if we want to fix any of this, including the environmental catastrophe that's on the brink, poisons in our water, in our food, in our soil, nations that have been warring for thousands of years with one another, for any of this to get better, we have to consider we haven't even figured out how to attend to childbirth, like the most necessary part of the extension of our species. We can't even seem to get that right, nor can we even get our own self-care right. We're still eating junk. We're still blaming others for how we feel and how we perform and how we look. Like, at some point we have to say enough is enough. What can we actually control? And this is something that is very much in our grasp. So if we want to fix the world, we have to start with fixing ourselves and how we show up for birth.
So what measures would you say we can control, or how do we take back our power? I know, like, simple self-care practices that we've been mentioning are vaginal steaming for one. So even like starting with our own like preparation for conception, how do you see these more simple pared back rituals of tuning back into our bodies helping us in our fertility, through pregnancy, through like later stages of labor? I know vaginal steaming now has an application for, or maybe always did, and into postpartum.
Well, there's two ways to look at it, and both of these models are borrowed from a friend of mine, Paul Chek. You've got six fundamental things that need to be on your radar, and those six things are how you eat, how you move, how you breathe, what are you drinking, water-wise, how are you hydrating, how are you breathing, or how are you sleeping? I may have said one of those twice, but then also, what is your mindset? You know, how are you showing up in the world? How are you managing stress? You could look at this a different way in the yin and yang, which can be broken into the 4-doctor model, also part of my friend Paul's model, which is Dr. Diet, Dr. Movement, Dr. Happy, and Dr. Quiet. And all of this is to say that you have to balance your desire to go out and do things and accomplish with the self-care and the quiet and the solitude. This is really where it's at. We have a society that values productivity over everything. But I would argue that your greatest currency is presence. If you can't be present with your kids, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how well they're eating. They want mom and dad to be present, not just booking in time for them, but to be truly present with them. So your presence, your sleep, the quality of your food, everybody has different amounts of resources. So I'm not saying eat like me, where we invest most of our income on the nicest food, nicest mattresses, the EMF mitigation, all of that. What I'm saying is that if you have any resources right now that you're going to spend on something that's going into your body, make sure that you're getting a good value, that you're getting the most nourishing ingredients. And if you have a lot of money, you have absolutely no excuse. And I'm kind of tired of like putzing around with the whole like hand holding thing. If you make more than $100,000 per year and you're not eating organic food and grass-fed beef, then shame on you.
Totally. And I love like the sentiment around presence too. And speaking of that too, I just want to be mindful of your time, because we have more time to be present, but curious what your...
We got a whole list of other questions we'd
So
love to get into with you, but if your schedule is, where are you at?
I actually have a woman who's waiting for me at my house downstairs who has a breech baby, and I'm going to turn her baby. So
important.
We can always do a part 2. We can always pick up where we left off at some point.
Yeah, we'd love to do that. I think we got about halfway through, and really fantastic stuff. We really appreciate having you on. And I will say, as a father who went through this, like the whole spectrum of, or watched my wife especially go through the whole spectrum of these care providers during our first birth, before we landed on home birth, looking back on it, if I had had an opportunity to do something like this, the Born Free method that you're doing at that time, or if we had had a chance to do that together, that would have been so helpful for us. I mean, we were lucky enough that we bashed our way through this whole spectrum on our own, but just by, sheer diligence and Jessica's, grit to get through and switch from one care provider to another before ending up on doing what was ultimately the best choice for our family. But so many other people don't even have that awareness or that opportunity in front of them. It's like you said, 98% medical hospital births is all that we've been given as an option societally. So it's really fantastic. I think that you're doing this, and we really appreciate having you on as a guest.
Guys, it's my pleasure. Anytime, and thank you for your support as well. Hopefully we can continue to spark some interest in this vaginal steaming program together. You know, this really, really beautiful way of caring for oneself, slowing down, being a little bit more thoughtful and meditative, and just cutting out 20 minutes of your time to sit on a comfortable stool and let steam and some medicinal herbs kind of just wash over you. This is a really, really important thing. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate just how valuable it is. You don't even have to have steam, or you don't even have to have, well, you don't actually even have to have steam, but just sitting still for 20 minutes and just being still is actually therapy in and of itself. Add the warm steam, add this medicinal herbs and the red light therapy, and you have yourself a really, really nice combination, 20 minutes a couple times per week for guys, or once a week, or, you know, before and after your bleed for women. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to do it, which I'll let you guys be the expert on that. But thank you for having me. I hope we can continue to spread the word about vaginal steaming, and I'm here to support you in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Yeah, like Andrew said, so appreciate your work in the world. It truly is a force. And I know that it's super magnetic for so many people that were able to tune in today. So thank you so much for your time. Wishing blessings to the woman you'll be working with downstairs. And yeah, looking forward to connecting more. Everyone, you can connect more with Nathan at belovedholistics.com, and the bornfreemethod.com has its own website too. So we'll be sharing more shortly. Thanks again, Nathan.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Nathan.